Well, we are back. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus. It's been almost 6 months since the last episode of Talkin Talent, but are excited to be back on track and we'll be planning a new episode monthly throughout 2024. Maybe more than one a month, but I don't want to set expectations too high, at least one a month in 2024. This 13th episode features a new colleague of mine, the Chief People Officer at Cherry Bekaert, Lindsey McCarty. We cover a few timely topics, including how to navigate acquisitions as an HR leader, and also how Cherry Bekaert thrives in a flexible work model. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining for this now 13th episode of Talkin Talent. This is Sam McCarthy. I really appreciate you listening. If you enjoy this episode, remember you can subscribe on Spotify. You can find it on the Cordy Resources website. And soon you'll be able to find it on some other platforms, which we'll discuss here in a second. We've had a little bit of a break. Our last episode was in July. We had done 12 episodes in about a year and a half. And we took a little bit of a break because it's coincided with some exciting news for Cordia and the Cordia Resources and Partners Group. And that news also involves our guest today. So as some of you may know, Cordia Resources and Partners was acquired by Cherry Bekaert this fall, which is really exciting for us. Gives us a chance to enhance our service offerings, spread out, and grow in other geographies. So really excited about what 2024 is going to bring. And with that, I'm very lucky to be joined today by Lindsey McCarty, who's the Chief People Officer at Cherry Bekaert, role she's been in since March of 2021, so a little over 2.5 years. I've recently gotten to know Lindsey a little bit in the past few months, but I'm excited to learn even more during this conversation. So Lindsey, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Just very quickly, for people can look you up, and you have a profile on the website. You can look you up on LinkedIn, but just give everyone a quick idea about your background and how you have gotten into the role that you're in today.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I've been here at Cherry Bekaert as the Chief People and Culture Officer since March of 2021. Prior to that, I spent about 16 years in a Big Four environment working across different parts of human resources. So I started my career off in campus recruiting and spent about 3 years or so doing that in the Mid-Atlantic region at that time. Spent lots of time on the road at career fairs, getting to know what was really important to students coming into their careers. And then I really parlayed that into more of like a business partner type of role. And so I moved into that at that point and had the opportunity to work with probably about 3,000 to 4,000 internal clients across different parts of the business at that firm. And I got to work on kind of the full scale and scope of human resources. I got to work on a lot of really interesting global projects and initiatives for the entire firm. And so all of that gave me a really good understanding of the breadth and scope of everything that you can do to enhance the employee experience from an HR perspective. And so kind of took that and moved to Cherry Bekaert from there.
Very good. How did you decide that, when you were looking for something new and you were moving on, how did the process go about your interest, your interest in the role at Cherry Bekaert, and why you thought at that time that was the right move for you?
It's really funny because I had worked at my prior firm for so many years. I had very strong relationships, and that really is what kept me there as long as I was. And I continued to grow and have different experiences. And so I wasn't really even thinking about leaving until I got a kind of a random headhunter reaching out to me a couple of years before I decided to make the move. And they were interested in talking to me about a CHRO position at a small accounting firm. And until then, it hadn't even crossed my mind that was something that I should maybe consider. And so I had some initial conversations, and then from there just decided to keep my eye out on what's out there in the market and really just be a little bit more curious about what opportunities I could have from a career perspective. And so it was a long process. It was a couple of years from that point to when I finally decided to make a move. But I felt that I had at that, a decade and a half of experience in the accounting profession, and I wanted to continue to leverage everything I knew about professional services and accounting. So I wanted to really stay in an accounting firm, but I really was attracted to the idea to be able to make a greater impact that you can have in a firm more this size compared to a really, really large global organization. So that's what really ultimately motivated me.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think you know, it's interesting. I'll work with, candidates at all levels, but a lot of people who are in that kind of director level and up who've had a number of years of experience, had some leadership roles, and have want to change industries drastically, and have been in an organization for a long time, and maybe been in professional services, and all of a sudden they want to go work for a tech startup or they want to go work for a nonprofit. And it's really hard to make a transition if you've only been in one place. And yeah, I know you made more of a similar, you went to a similar organization, at least in terms of industry, albeit smaller, and more dynamic. But yeah, it's tough. What's one of the questions I get is how can I make sure my resume, my experiences, the relationships I have can be versatile enough where I can switch back and forth between industries. Because a lot of people will say, HR is HR anywhere, right? It can be to an extent, but as you know, it can be different. It can be valued in different places. So I'm glad you had that good experience. Take a step back. I know something we talk about on all these shows. I'm curious about when either you first entered the workforce, or maybe a job that you had early in your life. Any correlation to anything, to what you're doing now? Any correlation to a job you had early in your career? Um, any correlation to what you're doing right now?
I definitely would never have imagined I would have ended up in HR. So in a very practical sense, no. But growing up, my dad always said, you should be a CPA someday. Like that was for years and years. He always said that about me. I just like numbers and working with data and things along those lines. So in some ways, it's really funny that I ended up, 2 decades into working in an accounting firm now, just on a different side of it. But really, I'd say my first kind of real job was a summer in high school. At that point, my dad owned a small local business that probably had between, I'd say, 10 to 15 employees, working in kind of like a retail sort of environment. And so there was an individual at his firm who did kind of like an office manager, finance department, kind of wore a million different hats. And she was going out on maternity leave for this summer. And so I was not in school during the summer. And so I moved in and made an epic minimum wage salary to fill in for her. But in that role, I had to do all of the accounts payable, receivable, payroll. I had to follow up with like larger local companies that were not really paying their bills in a prompt fashion. And I was able to see like what that whole life cycle is like for small business and how difficult it is trying to make ends meet, and the impact it has when one individual person has to be out sick or any of those sorts of things. So in many ways, that gave me an introduction to, kind of like the corporate professional working world a little bit. But that's, I'd say, kind of the start of my career from that standpoint. So
It's hard because the you think I would say, as someone who's had very little experience in retail, whether that is in a large retailer or a family owned business where you're dealing with people every day. It can look easy. We go into a store and we buy something, but if things go wrong, or there's an issue, they don't care whether you're 17 years old and working part-time, or if you've been doing it for 15 years. You have to figure out the problem. So that is certainly a value and a skill set that is very helpful, and something to get exposed to when you're young.
absolutely.
My parents were both teachers, and when I was growing up, I thought being a teacher would be cool. And my parents said, it can be. Unfortunately, teachers don't make nearly as much money as they should. You should aspire to be a teacher, and you could do something that's similar. But keep that in mind. And for a long time, I did think I wanted to teach, and maybe at some point in the future I can teach or coach when I have more time. But well, that's good. What if you don't mind, what kind of business did your father run?
So it was like office furniture.
Okay.
They would sell. There was a big local university that was one of their major clients, and then other local businesses. So you think about any company that's renovating their office space and getting all of the different furniture and things to fill it, was that type of company. So
Very cool.
they do like the installations, the ordering, the sales, like all those different things rolled into a very small environment. So
Yeah, and you're experiencing calling someone because they haven't paid their bill, and that is an uncomfortable thing to do, regardless of how old you are or how much experience you have. So you can grow
yeah,
up really quickly in those kinds of conversations.
absolutely. And it's
Um,
interesting about your interest in being a teacher. So my mom was a teacher professionally, and I always thought that that's what I wanted to be as well. And I actually, at one point earlier on in my HR career, started taking classes to go back to school to become a teacher. And then, similar to you, as I thought about just all the realities of that and what that looked like compared to where I was, I decided not to pursue that at that point. But it's very much of interest. And honestly, all of us do that in our roles too. Like, that's part of what we do with training in HR and things along those lines.
yeah.
It's basically adults are the students, right? But it's similar skill sets that can kind of overlap as well. So
And it was always weird to me because in the summers, if I was playing multiple sports and my sister was playing sports and my parents both weren't working, so it was the summer, I just assumed like, oh, nobody's parents work in the summer. What is this? This is weird.
yeah,
How come we're always picking up my friend and taking him to baseball practice? Well, because his parents both work and they're not teachers, so they don't. So that was the appetizing part of it. But then,
yeah,
there's certainly pros and cons. And now I feel like teachers are working at all. Like they might have like a month off. School goes so late and starts so early that I just remember I feel like my parents had almost 3 months off, and now I feel like it's maybe a month and a half. I don't know.
yeah,
That's a whole other conversation we could have. But
absolutely.
um, well, good. So let's get into something that we were talking earlier, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago when we first connected. This is my first time being in a company that was acquired by a bigger company and going through the process of integrating that. I know that Cherry Bekaert has acquired a few different companies this year and bringing them into their portfolio. So I'm curious about your experience, and it could be prior to this year as well, but your experience with leading the people function and how integrating new people into a firm, maybe some things that you have learned over the past couple of years, and some things that maybe you could share with others if they're going through that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack related to acquisitions. I think at the starting point, there are really two different aspects to it. One, there's the business integration. So there's a strategic reason that two firms decide to, kind of go down that path together. And what they view as opportunities for both to do more together than to do apart. So understanding what the different components are of the business through the due diligence process, understanding what's similar from a cultural standpoint, down to like all of the details that make a big difference in understanding the policy differences. If one policy is very different than the other and how that's utilized by the employees, like those are all the things that you need to understand. And there's a very small window of time in a relative sense to really fully delve in deeply to what a business is. So that there's, that aspect of it it's really important to make sure that it's successful from the business side and that you can anticipate culturally and from like an integration standpoint what the employees will experience. And then I would say the other side of things is truly the employee experience about the entire thing. And I think what's really something that I've observed along the way is for the leaders and the core team involved in acquisitions, they're going through that entire diligence process for however many weeks or months, whatever that is. So by the time they get to the point of announcing that this is happening, they've been able to work through, like they have lots of information. They've been able to work through their own kind of change management considerations to a large degree, not entirely, of course, because when everything actually finally closes, you move into a different phase.
Right.
But I think it's really important to keep in mind that for the typical employee going through an acquisition experience, that's brand new, shocking news to them on that day that they're receiving that they haven't had the benefit of all of that background. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind and to express like the right degree of excitement because everyone is excited about what the deal offers for everyone and the opportunities from a career perspective for individuals to grow and develop, while also recognizing that it's a lot for someone to absorb. They're gonna have lots of questions. Someone in that situation doesn't have a lot of agency. This is something that is being done to them at its core. And so I think really understanding what the employees are experiencing, what they're feeling, getting feedback from them along the way is really important. And every deal is different. You know, have some firms that are all very local based, everyone working in the same office together. You have others that you're incorporating that have been very dispersed around the country. So every single one is going to look a little bit different, but foundationally, all of those different considerations are the same, you know, regardless of the details of a particular deal.
Yeah, I know there's a lot. I know we could do a whole hour talking about the strategy behind that. I've been really impressed with how smoothly everything has gone. And I don't, again, you don't know what to expect, but just how prepared and how streamlined the communications were, the training, getting up to speed with things really quickly. And that, you know, I know that you know, how much did you have to advocate for yourself or the people team? And I know there's people, and then you obviously oversee talent acquisition. Did you have to advocate to structure the team differently, or ask for more resources, or figure out a way to structure it so that people were taken care of? Has that changed since you've started until now? Have you had to find different resources to be able to support those kinds of acquisitions?
I mean, I think going back over the history of Cherry Bekaert, even prior to me being here, we've always had a really strong acquisition strategy. That said, we've also moved into doing more acquisitions a little more rapidly over the last 12, 14 months or so. And so we had some really good historic knowledge and information that people pulled together from their prior experiences. And then as we decided to kind of just ramp up the speed a little bit of the deals that we were doing, just with really the pace of the world these days as well. We created a centralized team about maybe 15 months ago to focus on really the corporate development, project management, centralizing a few of those deal components. And then we've been working in each of our departments. So in people and culture, identifying who are some of the people that are in key roles that need to be very much involved in the process. And that's something we're continuing to iterate and, you know, evolve what that looks like over time. I think that's the key with doing any sort of acquisition activity. You get smarter every time. And that's a big part of really the process, is having a playbook to start with of how you're going to approach things, what you're going to do consistently, what information you need to be gathering, how you want to approach the employee experience, and then taking the feedback you're getting from the employees and from the entire arrangement and incorporating that into process improvements for the future. And so that's something we've introduced this fall, is doing a 3-part series of onboarding surveys for people who we have acquired, so that we can get that real life feedback from them, in addition to different opportunities where we're talking with them like on an ongoing basis and different feedback mechanisms, but really trying to hear what that experience is so we can continue to make sure we have the right resources.
That's great. And so again, I've been you know, I've been really happy with that, and I think that it's a you know, I work with some clients who are going through a situation where they have a pretty lean HR and talent acquisition team, and they acquire, you know, it's basically a small to mid-sized company acquiring another small to mid-sized company, and they're really going, you know, the leadership of the company is really trying to figure out, you know, some people want to try to do more with less when it comes to, historically, companies that try to do more with less in the, let's say, the HR space. And I joke around with my friends who are accountants, and a lot of people I work with. You always, you know, sometimes you see accounting teams that are huge, and then on the HR side, it's, you know, we always feel a little, you know, we feel understaffed. I just think that's there's almost not enough information you can have if you're sitting down if you're the top in HR professional in your company, and you're going and talking with your CEO or your CFO, or your COO, whoever you might report to, or the board, and having those conversations and trying to figure out, how do we develop the right team here? How do we put people in the best positions to succeed? And sometimes you're doing it in a really lean environment where you're dealing with a lot of different things. Your title might be one thing, but you're doing all these different tasks that may be outside of your job description. And for a while, it can be really crazy. So I'm really glad to hear all the investments and the resources that Cherry Bekaert has put into it. Another thing I want to discuss, and I've had multiple podcasts with numerous people from different backgrounds, and talked about had some future or had some previous guests who talked about once COVID became a part of our lives in March 2020, a lot of things changed, and we had some conversations about compensation, about HR systems, about HR business partnering. In this environment now, it's December 2023, so we're about to be coming up on 4 years of the term COVID-19 being in our lives, and the changes over the past 4 years in terms of a company's work model and how they feel like they want to run the organization in terms of putting their people in the best position to succeed, and whether that means you're all physically in an office, you're working a hybrid schedule, you're working remotely, and how to navigate that. So for you in your, when let's say in March 2021, you joined Cherry Bekaert, COVID had been around for a year. What did the environment look like then when you joined? How did you, what kind of situation were you in? And is it similar to what it is now? Because I know Cherry Bekaert's in a very flexible and hybrid environment. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time to make a move into a new role in the midst of, about a year into the time after COVID entered our world. So I think when I joined in March of 2021, a lot of people were still working 100% remotely. If I think back to the conversations kind of out there in the universe, for professional services type of jobs, you had like the full gamut of companies that had people kind of in office the whole time, others trying to figure things out. And I think we were still in that place where people were trying to figure out, like, what is the long term going to look like? We were very much in kind of that reactionary or temporary kind of mindset for how we were thinking about things. And so I think it was that September of 2021, so 6 months or so after I joined, that we rolled out what and maybe I'm biased here, but I think is really kind of the best of all of the worlds and a really reasonable approach to everything, which is to have a hybrid policy from a workplace perspective and to really focus on it being about intentional connections with people. And we've been able to maintain that. So it's been 2.5 years since then. And I continue to watch articles in the news about organizations kind of going every which way, yo-yoing in their perspectives on all this and all that in different directions. But at the end of the day, I think foundationally, like, why do people need to work in the same location as each other? It's because of very specific reasons. By being next to someone, you can learn by listening to their conversations. Maybe you're having a specific meeting, and I think we all know there are some meetings you can do really well virtually. Other ones, you get a group of people in the room and you can just knock out so much more than you could ever accomplish, in the same amount of time virtually. And so having the hybrid approach where we have people come together intentionally to form those relationships. But when you think about the foundation of how work works, it's based on trust. And the more time you spend with other people, whether it's in person or virtually, you can work on enhancing that. So I think we've got a really good model. We definitely have a good number of people who are 100% remote as well. We have people who prefer, for some roles, they need to be in the office much more frequently, if not daily. And then we have a lot of people that are, kind of 2-3 days a week in the office. But it's also highly reflective of individual needs, business needs, and those sorts of things as well. So I think it's a pretty good mixture.
For HR professionals and leaders who are in, say, different industries, or maybe are not as geographically dispersed as Cherry Bekaert might be, who are going through a situation right now where they're discussing with their leadership, they're having hard conversations about, we're not able to fill all these jobs because we have our in-person work requirements. We are not as flexible as some of our competitors when it comes to finding the best talent, or we're not retaining the people that we currently have because we've changed our in-office requirement from 2 days to 4 days, and people want more flexibility, so they're going to leave. And sometimes those leaders can be, there's certainly some stubbornness involved at times, and just some idea of, I want the organization to work the same way that I do because it's how I feel comfortable. Is there any advice you can give um, those who may be and they could be the same size organization, but maybe
Mhm.
smaller companies where you're really looked at to give guidance to leadership about what's out there, but how to you know, how to influence them in some way to get to the point of here's what I'm seeing out in the market. Here's what we're looking at and being able to actually make it actionable because that's the hardest thing is actually being able to sway somebody to a very strongly held opinion that they have for whatever reason or
Yeah.
or another.
I mean, I think there are probably a couple of things. I mean, for me, it's really important to get to the root cause of the why behind anything. So I think it's important in every industry, every company is going to have different whys behind what's important to them based on what they need to accomplish. So I think understanding that first and foremost, like why there's a desire to have people in person in the first place. What about that is like truly like legitimate in an unbiased sort of evaluation versus more of a preference. And there's a model, it's preferences, requirements, and traditions that's often used that I love to think about that. And I think that can be a helpful way to have conversations with people. Like, what is, a preference? Like, this is how I like to be, therefore everyone else must be like me. What is a requirement? If we're not in the office to meet our clients, we literally will lose business. And what is a tradition? We've always done it this way, therefore we should always continue to do it this way. And I think starting to break that can be a really effective way to start breaking down parts of the conversation to get at like, what is that really core fundamental requirement? And that doesn't mean that's where you land, that all you do is like the bare minimum requirement, but I think it can be a good framework for having that type of conversation. But I think you're also right too, that there are some people that are just very used to how they work, and that's been a long-standing way that's worked well for them, and it comes down to change, and some people are more comfortable with change than others. But I think all of those other areas that you talked about are really compelling reasons, like the ability to get strong candidates. If you're not finding them in your local market, how can you be more flexible to find people to be successful and move the company forward as well? So
Yeah, and I think it's the term flexibility is probably as important as anything. I think you know it's not that nobody wants to go out and about and see each other. It's that for I think for the better, the days of everyone coming to an office on a Monday at 8:30 and leaving at 5:30 and looking at the clock and everyone walking out at the same time and there being this, like someone's looking over your shoulder, and if you leave at 4:45 and everyone else stays, that's somehow viewed as being a negative, where we're all working in different places. You and I are both at home right now, and we are working just fine. Now I know that there's certain industries and certain people where you physically have to go out and be out in front of people. We just talked about it. Your first job was like that, and my first job was like that. So there are times there obviously those do exist, but yeah, I think your term about being intentional. What was the term you used? Intentional,
like intentional connections,
like
probably.
intentional connections. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard, making a business case for all, if we're all coming to the office and just spending time looking at each other on video calls, what is that necessary? It's actually
Yeah.
really funny. I thought about the other day. I used to, one of my least favorite things used to be commuting. And now I know this sounds weird because this is probably antithetical to almost everybody in every conversation I have. I kind of now enjoy the 30 to 45-minute drive I have a couple days a week when I do go to the office, because mentally for me, I can actually disconnect, as opposed to if I'm at home today, I might work for 12 hours. And that might not be healthy and I'm not moving around as much, but I can actually have this disconnect when I move from one place to another, because I can't do things in the car when I'm driving that I can do in front of a desk. And I actually but I didn't think about it like that before. I was probably stressed out. And I'll still come home and I might have to do more work, but I didn't think about commuting like that in the past. And so I think everyone's figuring out ways to cope with it. But that is one of the biggest conversations I have now, whether I'm talking to a CFO and they're hiring for an HR leader on their team. It's been nice. Sometimes people will now ask me, what are you seeing out there in similar kinds of companies you've worked with, and what has worked? And they don't always follow the same pattern, but they will, and HR leaders are much more empowered now to go through an interview process and ask, what do you do? And not just what, but why? Can you talk? And I always give that advice to people. If you're curious about why it's 4 days in the office, ask why and see. And maybe it's not the right place for you if you don't align with the the values of the organization. So
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched upon something really important there when you talked about your own experience with your commute, is that you have a little bit more control and flexibility over your schedule. So back in the olden days, when we had to, all of us, no matter what, had to commute Monday through Friday every week, there was really no consideration of anything else. It's something that's being foisted upon you, basically, and you have no control over that. But the second there's a little bit more flexibility, you have more control over it. You can start thinking about and reframing things. And I think that comes down to like all flexibility in all aspects of the workplace. And actually, when you talked about teachers earlier, while they have summers off throughout the rest of the year, they have basically no flexibility. They can barely take sick days a lot of times.
right.
So I think that's something that's very easy to take for granted, but the flexibility that we can have to work remotely, sometimes work in the office many times, can help us reframe and have a little bit more control over what our situation is and work in a way that works successfully for us. Because I mean, like you, when I used to live up in the Metro DC area, I commuted for years, an hour and a half each way. So 3 hours a day.
Oh,
and
that's a lot.
It was like planes, trains, and automobiles. It was like bus, metro, walking. So by the time I would get to the office, it felt like I'd lived an entire day and hadn't even really started yet. But that sort of thing just wears on you. And I think it's so easy to be used to me not doing that anymore, that when I think back to it, like the amount of like quality of life that we've been able to gather and gain in the last, handful of years, not in every industry to your point, but it's certainly in ours, is really pretty impactful for what that does from an experience like on a weekly basis and what that looks like for our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's I saw early in the pandemic there was a certain group that it was a week later and they're like, well, I'm still going to go to the office. If nobody's there, I'll go to the office. I'll close my door. I'll work. I work much better in the office. I can't work at home for whatever reason or another. And then and those were people who have been who aren't just graduating from school or aren't in their 20s and go joining the workforce. They were to the later part of their career, and that's all they'd ever known. So they were very comfortable with that. I'm seeing a little bit of a shift now, and it was the younger generation that was like, oh, this is great, and I can work from my apartment. I can be more flexible. I don't have to have the anxiety of going in and being around all these people. But I'm seeing a little bit of a shift now, and I think that the generation of the workforce that is in the latter stages of their career, who have all they've known is being in an office 5 days a week for 8 or 10 hours a day, are now enjoying the flexibility of coming in at 10 and leaving at 3:30 or 4 because they have something going on, and then knowing. And I'm actually seeing young. I don't know if you've seen this as well, but people early in their career, it's not. I think it's a misnomer. I don't think that they necessarily want to just sit by themselves at home and do work on their computer, and then everyone thinks, oh, well, maybe they're just watching TV. But I don't think that's the case. They do want to go out and see people, but it's the flexibility part of it. They just, yes, you need accountability, and yes, you have responsibility, but that doesn't mean that it has to be sitting in a cubicle for 10 hours a day where someone's older. So I just still think flexibility is the key word there.
I agree. And I think that's something that Gen Z is doing really well as they enter the workforce, is asking those really like the why question, like, why do we do it this way? Is there a better way to do it? Because when I talked about that hour and a half each way commute that I had, there would be entire days or weeks where I would be in there. I was in a cube. It was in an area that had no windows to the outside, and I had coworkers who I loved, but they were in their offices, door closed, on the call all day. I would literally not even talk to another human being. And I was commuting all the way, like that makes no sense, right? When you think about it, there's like zero logic there. And I think that's a really wonderful thing that millennials started, and then Gen Z is bringing into the workforce even more, is asking that why. And like, if there's intention, that makes sense. And people want to be together in a way that's meaningful, but to do it just for the sake of doing it, I think that's something we've needed in the workforce for a long time, to ask those questions and to be really thoughtful about why we do the things we do and how we can continue to evolve that. So
That's great. No, thanks for sharing your perspective on that. It's a really interesting conversation. I know it's not going to end anytime soon. This is going to keep going on. The thinking about, living in the DC area and seeing all these buildings that are here that we have to figure out what to do with them over the next couple of years, whether it's commercial or residential real estate. There are a lot of decisions that need to be made. I'll go sometimes into DC to go to lunch, to try to go to lunch with somebody, and I'll have to just double check to make sure that that restaurant that I might have not been to for 3 years is actually open for lunch still, because there just aren't enough physical people who are, a lot of the government agencies are still having people working almost fully or mostly remote. There's not as many people there. So it is going to transform, and it's just transforming cities all over the place. And so that's a whole nother conversation, but I think it's a really interesting one.
It is. I agree.
I know we didn't discuss, it's just something I thought about as we were talking. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but it's not too difficult. What is one benefit, maybe something that either Cherry Bekaert's added in the past year, or something that you think is a really important benefit that maybe not a lot of people talk about, that you think is really impactful, or has really been something that either current employees or employees that have been recruited to Cherry Bekaert really enjoy? Is there something or maybe you don't have it right now, but it's something you're looking at in the future? Is there anything that stands out to you?
So a couple of years ago, we introduced an entire firm closure for the week of 4th of July. So Monday through Friday that week, we fully shut down as an entire firm. We granted those extra days to people as extra vacation days. We didn't eat into PTO time or anything like that. I know we're not the only firm that does that, but that's still not something that's a norm across the board or anything along those lines. But I think having that collective shutdown is phenomenal. And that's one of the things that we heard people who lived through it the first year and then have been here since we've had it now implemented for several years. I think that's one of the hard things about the workplace that teachers don't deal with. When the summer, when they're closed for the summer, everyone's closed. But in the work that we do, typically when you're out on vacation, the emails are coming in, you're missing calls, things are piling up, people are waiting for you to get back. And having an entire 5 days where we all are off at the same time is amazing. And people have learned just the amount of relaxation that you can get and the lack of just mental stress and coming back from that. So I think that's been a really huge benefit that I personally love, that a lot of our people love, and has been really helpful from a recruiting standpoint as well. So I think that's a really kind of an untapped benefit for a lot of companies still, but it's I think carries a lot more weight than many others do. So.
And it's in July. It's not in February, where I know February would be impossible in the accounting world. But it's at a good time of the year. When I saw that, I was like, that can't be right. I'm reading that wrong. Be interesting to see how and I don't know if the Cordia resource is part of we haven't talked about that yet. I don't know if it's possible for everyone to take a week off. We'll have to discuss that. But I think it's going to be it's such a nice thing to be able to look forward to. Especially if you're not using PTO for it. And that's I've actually, before I forgot about that before we had this conversation. That is a really good one. Yeah. And I think benefits are there are a number of candidates who have made lateral moves from one job to another. The salary is pretty similar, the role might be pretty similar, but are moving for benefits. So companies who are doing creative things, who are thinking outside the box. There's some stuff that some people don't care about. At the end of the day, the money and the work location and work model are still important. But I've had some people make moves because the companies invested so much into benefits, and not just health, dental, vision, 401k, but all the other things that show that there's creativity, and they're valuing people outside of work. So that's a great answer. Thank you. I have to I'm gonna have to book a trip for something in July. That'll be nice.
You should.
Well, Lindsey, thank you for joining me. I wish we could talk longer. We'll have to do this again sometime, and we'll have to check in next year and do this. But thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sam.
So happy holidays to you, Lindsay. Happy holidays to everyone listening. If you're hearing this, it's likely to be in January after the holidays are over. So I will say, hopefully everyone's holidays went well. If you're in a place where there's cold weather, I don't know if you've had you're experiencing that right now. You may be experiencing some snow. It's going to be in the mid 50s and sunny here in DC in the week in the week ahead. So I don't think we're going to see any snow. But again, Lindsay, thank you for joining me, and we'll check in with everybody soon.